Work-Based Learning for Youth. I'll turn you over to our Federal Policy Analyst, Katie Spiker, and we can get started.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you everyone for joining our webinar today, Promising Practices in Work-Based Learning for Youth. National Skills Coalition and the National Youth Employment Coalition just released a paper with the same title, focusing on work-based learning as an emerging strategy to connect at-risk and out-of-school youth and to jobs and job training with local businesses through programs like paid internship, on-the-job training, apprenticeships, on which we'll focus today in our conversation. I'm joined on the webinar by my co-author of this paper, Thomas Showalter, National Youth Employment Coalition's director, and 4 experts that we featured in this paper who are running youth work-based learning programs. Al Falice from Business and Career Services in Illinois, Dan Sin of Urban Alliance in DC, Dan Knapp from Conservation Corps of Long Beach in California, and Deb Lindner from Precor Inc. in North Carolina. To give you a little bit of an idea of the format for the next hour, I'll turn the conversation over to Thomas to share a brief framing of the paper before we begin with some questions for our panelists. We'll hear from each of them with a little bit more introductions to their programs, and then I'll share some of the policy recommendations that National Skills Coalition and NYUC came to after talking with these and other youth workforce development and work-based learning programs. Finally, we'll leave 15 to 20 minutes to finish the webinar with time for audience questions. Like Sylvia noted, you can type your questions into the box at any time, and we'll circle back to these as we wrap up the webinar. So with that, I'll turn it over to Thomas to share a little bit more information about our paper.
Thanks, Katie. As Katie mentioned, I'm Thomas Showalter. I'm the director of the National Youth Employment Coalition. I'm really excited that we got a chance to work on this paper. I really hope that this is the first of many resources kind of providing a really broad look at all of the different varieties of work-based learning that are happening in the field. And so one thing I'm going to walk through some of the key lessons that we learned talking to a range of programs, and I just wanted to draw your attention to the kind of the structure of the paper. As you look through, you'll notice under each of the case studies that we have, they actually are organized around these 4 key elements that we describe in the paper. So for each of the models, you can kind of see in parallel what they're doing around each of these 4 key elements. So some of the through lines that we found in talking to a wide range of work-based learning providers who you're about to hear from is that first they share paid work opportunities, whether provided by whether the employer is is actually providing the wages, or whether a youth service provider, somebody is providing wages to the young person who's involved. I also would draw your attention to a recent paper that came out that really delved into exactly how important these wages are to young people. The Urban Institute just released an update to their dropping out, clocking in report that came out last year. It's called Dropping Out, Clocking In, and Falling Behind, I believe, and it really does a good job of cataloging how much young people who are at risk of dropping out and then do drop out contribute to their household's income, how important income is to them. A second key element that we found was really strong partnerships with business and community stakeholders. This is often an area where you see intermediaries playing a strong role in terms of brokering relationships. And again, that intermediary brokering role can be played by a standalone organization, by a sector partnership, by a provider itself, by a chamber of commerce. There are many varieties of this kind of role that we're seeing around the country. Another key element is the incorporation of positive youth development and support services for young people. This is as many of you on the call know, I know many of the people on the call are experts in work-based learning and maybe doing a lot of this work already. So, many people on the call probably know how important it is to address sort of all of the barriers that low-income and disconnected young people are facing to really make it possible for them to succeed in work and school. But I think an interesting point that came up in several of our conversations was the extent to which incorporating positive youth development strategies can really reassure employers that these young people are really can really become valuable employees for them over time, because they know that these young people will have access to the kinds of services and supports that will make it possible for them to overcome the various barriers that might prevent them from succeeding in the workplace. Final key element that we found were really strong linkages to career pathways and future employment opportunities. And this can take, many forms. As many of you probably know, we're seeing as the sector partnership movement matures, we're seeing more and more iterations of what pathways can look like in different sectors. But we found that really strong connections to not just future employment opportunities, but mentoring and all kinds of interpersonal relationships for young people are really important. One thing I think runs through all of these elements, and then I'll turn it back over to Katie, is really the importance of relationships across all of these programs, in terms of figuring out who's paying wages to young people, developing the kind of long-term trusting relationship with employers that's really required to get employers really strong buy-in to these programs over time, really facilitating the linkages and case management and connections to childcare and other services that young people might need. All of this takes really strong relationships among a wide range of partners. This isn't just one provider and one employer. So I think that's something that really struck me when we were talking to some of the programs you're about to hear from, just how what amazing relationship builders a lot of these folks are. So I think you'll really enjoy hearing from our panelists today. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Katie.
Thanks, Thomas. That was great. So if we move on to the next slide, then I'd love to turn over and spend the bulk of our time today speaking with our panelists. I'd like to start with you, Al, but I'll ask all of the panelists the same question. Can each of you provide a short introduction of your program, and then also describe why you've determined the need to provide work-based learning opportunities for youth?
Sure. Thanks, Katie. Again, my name is Al Schlitz, and I'm with Business and Career Services, and we're located in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. As indicated in the paper, our program is focused on providing exposure to youth to the manufacturing industry. And it started kind of back in the depths of the recession back in 2011 as as a pilot program under ARA. There was a big push during that time for work experience programs, and rather than, we had done some of the traditional summer youth work experience, and those were valuable for what they were, to get youth engaged in meaningful short-term work experiences. But when the opportunity came around to pilot something a little bit differently, we looked at our industry in the area, and we had a group of very active and engaged manufacturers that all that came together to discuss, common issues in the industry, and one of the things that became very apparent was that they all, even though this was again during the time of the recession, we're all feeling a need to connect with the emerging workforce. The average age of a skilled manufacturing worker is 50 plus, and they could see that even though the industry was hurting, the sector was hurting as a whole at the time, that the handwriting was on the wall in terms of needing to introduce some to reach out to younger people to look at manufacturing as a career. So when this opportunity came along, we talked with this group who served as a tremendous in a tremendous advisory capacity, and they helped us put together this model. And as I mentioned, it is internship based. It starts with one thing they told us is that we can teach the technical skills, but we really need people to have those. As anybody who's been in a workforce for any length of time knows, same thing to all employers say. We need the soft skills. We need them to have good attendance and ambition on the job and appearance and all those things that make a good employee. They can teach them the technical skills that go along with manufacturing. We coupled that with tours to company facilities, in that everybody knows what goes on in a school, goes on in a hospital, but when you drive past a manufacturing plant, it's a mystery as far as what goes on there, and there's a lot of there's a lot of neat things that do appeal to you. For years, manufacturing as a whole, has suffered a perception problem as a career path for youth. Everything from being dusty and dirty to all the jobs being, offshored and lots of layoffs and so forth. But manufacturing is coming back, and in many ways led the way out of the recession. So we do tours, we do OSHA training, we do forklift training, and as a result of employer input, do shop math training. Started this out as a small pilot program with 20 kids, and we thought, because of the time, that if 25% got jobs as a result, that it would be a success, and they would have been exposed to manufacturing. Well, it turned out that 75% got jobs directly as a result of their internship. Try it again, and the result was similar. So from a small pilot, it is expanded way beyond just Northern Cook County, and has gone throughout the city of Chicago to other areas in Cook County that particularly hard hit economically, as well as the surrounding counties in Northeast Illinois. And consistently, the results have been 75% to 80% get jobs directly as a result of training. Others go on to advanced training in manufacturing. For those who don't get jobs, they still are, they still get a lot of value out of the soft skills that are taught during the boot camp. So it's been a very positive experience overall.
Thanks, Al. I think that's a really interesting perspective to share, the call from your local businesses that really drove you towards working with youth, and the role that you've played as an intermediary to help facilitate community-based organizations across your state working with their local employers. I'll turn it over to Dan Sin now for a brief introduction, and then an explanation of how you all started working with youth for youth work-based learning.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Finn, and I'm the Director of Data and Accountability at Urban Alliance. We're a youth development nonprofit that uses professional work experience, work skills training, and mentoring to help young people transition into adulthood and into a pathway that will lead to economic self-sufficiency. We've been around for 20 years, and in that time, we've placed over 3,000 young people in internships and have provided skills training to an additional 15,000 across 4 regions, here in our home base in Washington, D.C., but also in Baltimore, Chicago, and in Northern Virginia. We primarily work with at-risk youth coming from high-poverty neighborhoods and high schools. Our students are likely on track to graduate high school, but often lack a plan to do anything else. So we think our intervention occurs at a key time in their development. Here's how it works. First, the students go through a sort of professionalism boot camp, a 5 or 6 week crash course that we call pre-work that focuses on communication, office etiquette, goal setting, and other job readiness skills. The students are then placed in an internship where they can receive up to 600 hours of on-the-job training at banks or law firms, government agencies. We even have an intern with the Chicago Bulls. Their training continues throughout the week and weekly professional development sessions designed to improve their internship and plan for life after it. All the while, they're coached by on-site mentors to shape their professional growth and increase their network. This work doesn't happen without our job partners. So I want to touch on that for a quick second. And getting these organizations to agree not just to take a 17-year-old intern, but to pay for a 17-year-old intern is no easy task. And so we have people in each of our regions whose sole job it is to manage these relationships. And from the onset of the partnership, we work to make it as easy as possible. It starts with training all the managers. We cover everything from how do you have a young person in your office to sample projects to help them get going. Each team has a set of program coordinators who, aside from providing the training to the young people, act as a liaison between the youth and the organization if any issue arises. Our program coordinators are always on call, ready to step in and smooth anything over. And finally, make sure there's lots of opportunities for feedback. We've developed a skills rubric so that mentors can tell us how our students are performing and where we need to coach them. Our program team also conducts in-person site visits to check in on both the student and the mentor. We use all this information in real time to make improvements to both the student and the job site.
That's fantastic, Dan. Thanks for sharing that information, and you really emphasized the role that you all play as support services to both your youth and to the businesses with which you work that help facilitate those relationships. I'd love to hear now from Dan Knapp from Conservation Corps of Long Beach.
Thanks. Again, this is Dan Knapp, Conservation Corps of Long Beach. I've been doing this Conservation Corps thing for over 20 years now, although I'm new here in Long Beach. I just joined the organization last February as the executive director. Prior to that, I was with the Los Angeles Conservation Corps for over 19 years. And real quick, my background is conservation. I was going to be a resource manager, a resource planner. You know, we'll work on water planning. I joined the Corps on a whim way back when, right out of grad school. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I thought I was joining a conservation environmental organization. And my wife asked me, I think after the second day of work, so what do you think? I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of a social services agency. It's really not my bag. I quickly fell in love with the model, the holistic approach to youth development and how it relates to both the urban built environment and the greater conservation movement. And so I've been doing it for over 20 years now. So Conservation Corps of Long Beach, we're about 27-year-old nonprofit organization. We're one of 13 certified corps in California. That certification means that we're written into the California Resource Code, into the Labor Code. So for example, we're exempt from prevailing wage as a certified job training program, term program. We're written into the Transportation Code. We've been very successful legislatively as a movement in California to identify and advocate for core-friendly, youth development, job training-friendly legislation in California, and we're very proud of that, and the movement continues to grow. We're part of a larger network of conservation corps and service corps across the country under the Corps network, well over 100 established out there. Most are nonprofits, but some of them are state agencies. You know, and when people ask me about what does a conservation corps do, I generally say we're first and foremost the youth development agency. Again, I wish somebody would have told me that when I first came in, but I learned it very quickly. We utilize public benefit type projects, construction, park enhancements, urban forestry, habitat restoration, recycling, what have you, as a means of that youth development, I'm sorry. Most of our young folks are with us at least 6 months. Some of them are with us up to 3 years. As a certified conservation corps in California, we must have an academic education component for any of our members that come to our doors without a high school diploma. And over the years, the academic enrichment in the corps in California has evolved to the point where most corps, or about half the corps in California, actually manage or operate their own charter high school. The other half have a very strong relationship with an existing or a larger charter school academic provider for their young people. Most of our work-based learning reflects the projects that we do. Again, the conservation corps, are modeled after the original civilian conservation corps during the Great Depression under FDR. So we do a lot of resource management, recycling, urban greening, urban forestry, habitat restoration, landscape construction, light construction, community outreach and education. Those are the types of projects that we do. And again, that's what most of our training is based on, those types of things. Most of the urban corps in the United States kind of have a three-legged stool model that they kind of that guides them. Conservation, that's the work, that's the projects that we're doing out in the community. Most of that funding is public funding, whether it's grant monies or a fee-for-service contract we have with the city of Long Beach to plant trees, to do habitat restoration, what have you. That brings most of the young folks to our doors are looking for an opportunity to put a little bit of money in their pocket, get their first job. The second leg of the stool is the education, the academic aspect of it. If you do not have your high school diploma and you come to the Conservation Corps, you must go to school with us. Again, as I mentioned earlier, very successful legislatively in the state, where we're also written in the California Education Code, where we can provide a high school diploma up to age 25. So again, a lot of young folks, it's that big question, do I go to school or do I work? Where I think that alternative that actually hits both of those sweet spots. So got the conservation, money in the young person's pockets, job training, good public benefit projects out in the community, academic education, and then the third leg of the stool is the support services, case management. Anything, it's an inward focused element of the Corps, where we have a team of folks working with our young folks to try to overcome or address any barriers that might prevent them from being successful post-Corps, whether it's being job placement, whether it's expungement of records, or garnering a driver's license, housing, parenting, all those things that the young folks that we all deal with every day are barriers to their success post-Corps. Our partners, generally, like I mentioned, generally include mostly public agencies. Conservation Corps Long Beach, I'd say about a third of our funding is state, but another third is, probably about half is local. A small portion is federal. We also work with other NGOs, CBOs, nonprofits, community-based organizations that partner up. And more to the point of, I think, what we're discussing today, we've been moving more and more into that partnering with the private sector, both primarily on trying to segue our young folks into the private sector, into jobs, and have us look at it as that conduit for future employees locally, but also more and more what we're seeing here in Southern California, at least, as it addresses some of the projects that we do, there's more of an emphasis and there's more of a focus on this public-private nonprofit partnership. So, for example, a project that we're working on right now with the City of Long Beach, there's a new development park space in Long Beach. It's an old oil field, and quite frankly, it's been remediated. City of Long Beach owns the property. It's a public parcel. we're working with a couple private industry folks in the nursery industry and in the ecological restoration and consulting industry to help us transform it into a native landscape and actually install a native plant nursery there. And then we, as the local NGO nonprofit, would then manage the site, use it as a training ground for our folks as, as a way of benefiting the public. So again, the city doesn't have the means to monitor it and operate it. The private sector is looking for good job skills and for entry-level employees. So this kind of relationship is working out to kind of segue our folks onto something bigger and better. In California, I think the Corps has been very successful. Well, I'm trying to choose my words carefully here. I was going to say we're able to capitalize on some of the more dire environmental and conservation kind of issues. So again, Western United States, we're in a terrible drought. We continue to be in a terrible drought. That actually is an opportunity for us to actually train our folks in native plant propagation, restoration, turf removal projects, things like that, as well as climate change. California's always been kind of on the forefront of environmental legislation. There's actually considerable money in California in the cap and trade program for reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We're kind of, as a movement of all the Corps in California, we're trying to position ourselves to take advantage of that funding, because not only is it money for us to put young folks to work now, but we also see it as an opportunity, as a viable, growing market for jobs in the future. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Dan. That was a really great description of the support services that you all provide, the career pathway that you link your participants to. And I know we'll have some questions from folks in the audience and some more about some of the other elements as well. I'd love to turn it over to Deb Lindner to hear a little bit about the Guilford Area Partnership Apprenticeship Program.
Thanks, Katie. Hello, everyone. GAP, which stands for the Guilford Apprenticeship Partnership, located in Guilford County, North Carolina, was formed in 2015 after initially 30-plus manufacturing employers, mainly small to medium-sized, gathered to discuss their skilled labor shortage. The Workforce Solutions Collaborative was the key support organization in bringing these companies together. They saw the long-term benefit and helped launch an employer awareness effort. A skilled workforce is the single most critical element of innovation and success, but the hardest asset for manufacturers to acquire. Therefore, we chose to focus on a youth apprenticeship program because in order to meet our future business needs, we realized that we had to grow our own talent, and why not start with the youth and establish a pipeline for the next generation of workers. As I mentioned, while we have 30-plus companies all very much interested, but due to various reasons such as lack of upper management's understanding of the value of an apprenticeship program, resource limitations, program design not meeting their needs, and other various roadblocks, including costs, we launched the GAP program with 6 employers. These 6 employers overcame many barriers and worked collaboratively to find a program design that worked for everyone. Each employer paid $1,000 up front, and we used every penny. Being a small to medium-sized employer, this seemed a lot of money, but it was just the beginning of costs, including time and resources. From the beginning, we had support partner organizations willing to do whatever it took to get our program launched. This definitely helped defray some of our costs. The support organizations, I will tell you, is very critical to any group of employers looking to launch an apprenticeship program and go from concept to registration. The Triad Workforce Solutions Collaborative, the Greensboro Partnership, and the Guilford County Workforce Development Board assisted GAP in further connecting with the Guilford County Schools CT program and our community college. We were also able to form a strong partnership, including getting a dedicated resource with the NC Department of Commerce and the NC Apprenticeship Council. Again, one of the major support and successes was partnering with the high school CT program, as we were able to connect with the principals, counselors, parents, and students and provide them information as to how and why a work-based learning program such as GAP could be the option for the student who was not interested in attending a 4-year school. While I mentioned that each employer paid $1,000, each employer gave more by developing marketing materials, setting up a website, going out to the schools, participating in the high school career events, holding on-site open houses and meetings, creating orientation materials, including all the project materials. While we found that there was limited industry-specific guidance in starting an apprenticeship program, I think the success of the GAP launch was very much due to the part of having the right businesses and the support partners and their commitment. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks so much, Deb. So we already have some questions trickling in from audience members. If folks have other questions, feel free to submit. I think one of the questions that we hear repeatedly and that each of the programs and panelists have innovative approaches to is how you all have addressed the barriers to and overcome those barriers to engaging with employers, both as you were starting your program and as it was growing. I'd love to kick off the answers with Dan Sin, and then I'll just let the other panelists jump in as they want to contribute their strategies.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so like I said earlier, it can be really hard to get these businesses to agree to young paid interns, especially when they might be getting college interns for free or for unpaid internships. So aside from the support that we offer, all the strategies I discussed earlier, whether they be the manager training, the program coordinator liaison, the opportunity for feedback, we believe it's our job to make the value proposition as clear as possible. What do you, as a business, get out of it? And at UA, we believe the value proposition has to be separate and apart from simply benefiting their corporate social responsibility. So these benefits can include anything from helping build your local community workforce, improving your workplace diversity, and not just of age and race, but of life experience as well. Improved office culture. Studies have shown that just the presence of young people in your office can improve employee satisfaction and retention. And finally, managerial training for junior level staffers. You have employees who might not otherwise be managers or might be years away from being a manager, now in charge of actual people, setting deliverables and managing projects. What incredible hands-on training that they'll get. Or Urban Alliance can make managers out of employees.
That's really interesting, Dan. I think that frontline manager training is an innovative practice. Al, Dan, or Deb, did you have any experience you wanted to share?
Yeah, sure. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Nope, just finishing the question, please.
Okay, sure. This is Al Schlitz. As I mentioned earlier, one of the things that certainly helped us in working with manufacturers is that they all tended to be experiencing the same issue with respect to their workforces and the need to attract a younger workforce into that industry sector. Another thing that we do is that we make it participation easy for the employer participants, and that the program pays the wages, it assumes the insurance liability, workers' comp, we pay for any safety equipment that's necessary. Now this, of course, doesn't mean that there's free labor for the employer. They dedicate hours and hours of time. Anybody who's ever sponsored an intern in their own operations knows how labor intensive that can be. But that helped to remove part of it. Now we have talked with employers, and because of the issues that they are facing, we're exploring ways where there will be an employer contribution. But overall, what our main objective was to make it as simple and easy to understand and easy to participate for the employers as possible.
Thanks, Al. That's great. And seems to be the consistent theme about facilitating business engagement. Deb or Dan?
Sure. One thing that we're doing as we take an introspective look of how we operate as an organization and what we bring in-house expertise and what do we farm out for the expertise. Kind of by default, what's happened with us is that we've been bringing on more and more private industry folks to, again, I mentioned earlier, our wheelhouse is primarily conservation type projects in the, the greater Long Beach community and, even on the Channel Islands and Catalina, what have you, as opposed to bringing in our own construction, experts or ecological experts or what have you. We've been contracting out more and more with private industry where we bring in a company to help us oversee a project. They're essentially acting as maybe a project foreman sometimes or, or technical oversight, but then they're also engaging with the young folks that we're working with day in, day out, and they're working with them day in, day out. And they build a relationship and they get to see who's maybe their next entry-level employee. We've had considerable success in segueing our folks in from the core over to one of our private industry partners in that regard, just because of proximity, osmosis, so to speak. We're working with them on a regular basis. They're getting something from us, or maybe we're teaming off a little piece of a contract to bring them in for this technical aspect, but in turn, they're getting a first-hand view of their future employees oftentimes. That's one, on the private side, that's how we've been doing it for a few years now, and we're looking to grow that side as, again, kind of the proverbial two birds with one stone. Instead of me having to hire full-time expert here, here, and here, I have a portfolio of good partners who are getting something out of it, but also the biggest thing that we're all getting out of it is we're transitioning folks from the core onto a living wage job.
That's great. Thanks, Dan. And Deb, particularly as a local business HR rep in your area, have you had any innovative ways that you've overcome barriers to engage other employers or to keep your own participation in the program?
Sure. As the employer, overcoming barriers was not an easy task. Most of the companies understood what is an apprenticeship program, but creating one and implementing one was a little overwhelming. Our first challenge, we hadn't done this before, but we leveraged the experience of a few already established programs such as NCTAP and the Apprenticeship 2000. Being a small to medium-sized employer, we had limited resources and a small budget. But I think once we had and held our first meeting with the local high school principals and counselors and received an overwhelming, yes, let's do this, we knew that all our efforts, whatever barriers that we would succumb to, would be all worthwhile. We had to get out to our parents and the high school students and create a new and different perspective of manufacturing. No, it's not the dying and dirty industry. Many parents didn't realize what opportunities their child could have in a skilled trade, and most importantly, didn't realize that the company was willing to pay for their education 100%. Time was still and still is a big barrier. All the business partners have full-time jobs and generally spend about 5 to 10 hours per week. That just adds to our workload. I think everybody can appreciate that. We've managed through our first year. Some companies gave more than others, and there were some tough discussions with each other, deciding upon wages and agreeing what we all would do and agree to the same, whether it be 2, 3, 4 years. It was a lengthy discussion, but in the end we did come to an agreement. I think one of the most concerns that we really did have was to have the student numbers for the college courses. There was a course minimum number, and with only 6 employers participating and only having 1 to 2 apprentices, we were not sure we could meet this requirement. So there was a lot of meetings and discussions with the local community college. While we did meet and exceed the course requirements, this still is a potential barrier as we grow and enter different business segments and offer additional apprenticeship programs. I think one of the main things, gather your lessons learned, and then as we enter our second year and as more employers join the GAP program, we will need to continue to partner and in order to successfully grow our GAP program.
Thank you, Deb. So before we hop into some of the questions we have coming in from participants on the line, I want to move on to the next slide really quickly and do a quick overview of one of the important outcomes of our conversations was to realize just where public policy can step in to help facilitate this expansion. We've got the panelists who are on the line, as well as many of you all who are calling in, who are running really successful programs, who are working with local partners, local businesses, and really doing many of the promising practices that we highlight, and how can we ensure that policy can help support these efforts. So throughout our conversations and from what we've heard from the panelists today, we made 4 recommendations. First, we recommend that congressional investment in youth workforce development activities facilitate work-based learning and that we increase this funding. As we heard from Dan and really all the panelists, these programs are intensive, they're expensive, and they're rarely, if ever, have the kind of support necessary to serve the level of demand both from the youth that they're serving and from businesses who can and would place students in work-based learning programs. As many of you all probably know, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act requires a major shift in funding to target out-of-school youth that many of the panelists today programs work with. But we haven't seen Congress fund that at authorized levels since the law was passed. And even in addition to WIOA funding, we still see holes in the amount of support that congressional funding could step in and fill. So just as a note, last month Representative Scott introduced the Opening Doors for Youth Act, which would invest over $5.5 billion over 4 years to help increase the capacity to provide some of the summer jobs and really the year-round jobs that can fall within the work-based learning models that we're talking about today. Our second recommendation is that the administration should invest in intermediaries that can facilitate the expansion of work-based learning for youth. Again, as Deb and Al talked about their roles and the need for the entity to really step in between the training provider and the business to help remove some of the risk and barriers for both of these entities in expanding the work-based learning to fulfill that convener role that can take just time and energy that other stakeholders may not have to ensure the success of a program. Third, we recommend that Congress should expand financial incentives to businesses who are participating in work-based learning. As we just heard Deb say, their program started with more than 30 organizations who were initially interested in the program, and now there's 6 employers. And a lot of these employers, from our conversations with Deb and with other entities, the big barrier was how they're going to be able to start or expand a program. So subsidies, tax credits can help lower the risks and can help engage some businesses who otherwise may not be able to participate in the kind of partnership necessary to help expand work-based learning. Another bill that we see in Congress right now, Senator Murray and Senator Hatch have introduced bipartisan legislation, the EARNS Act, that would provide up to $25,000 in subsidies for employers for registered apprenticeship programs. And this kind of investment can help support the businesses working with the different partnerships. And finally, we recommend that DOL issue additional guidance for the workforce development system on working with employers who are hiring out of school and at-risk youth. Some of the questions that I'll dive into now and that we heard from our panelists on the line really touch on the fact that working with businesses and working with young people can often need additional technical assistance to ensure that everyone is operating with the best practices and really has the most information, because sometimes that information sharing can be a barrier within itself. So I will turn now to some questions that we have from the audience. Again, we'll focus on the panelists' expertise at this point. So for Dan Sin, Dan, can you talk a little bit more about your management training, the setting, and how you set employer and employee expectations?
Sure. So in each region, our program year follows the school calendar. So at the beginning of each program year, we host events that we call kickoff, where we convene the students, the families, and the job site mentors. And there's sections of the day when everyone's together, when we talk about the program at large, but then everyone splits off and we have kind of targeted instruction. So that's the first part of what we call mentor training. So we'll go over the calendar, what some of the expectations are, how they might deal with students, things that we'll take care of. It can be really, really intimidating for these people to have, if they're not in the youth development field, and many of them are not, to have 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds working in their office. They're not sure about the kind of issues that they could be handling. So we tell them the way that the program coordinator will interact, and the kind of things that we'll handle, and the kind of things that we'll want them to handle. But I think the important thing is that relationship is reinforced throughout the year, whether it's through the mentor emails that go out every week, the site visits I talked about, which are formalized sessions every quarter, or just the fact that the program coordinators are on standby, waiting for calls and waiting to intervene. So it's not something that's lost in us about the importance of that relationship, but also one that we recognize that we need to be there every step of the way.
Thank you, Dan. Al, we have a question for you about what funds and how you're funding the wages for your participants in the program.
Sure. Primarily, it's WIOA funds that provides the funding for both the internships, staff costs, etc. Now, we also have funding from a couple of foundation grants that came about and are targeted to serve high poverty areas in and around the city of Chicago, but overwhelmingly our funding comes from WIOA.
Great. One of the key themes in the paper, and something that we've got a couple questions for all of our panelists on right now, is how serving youth in work-based learning programs can differ than serving adults, and what kind of support services are most necessary to ensure the success. I'd love to start with you, Dan Knapp, who you talked about the three-legged stool approach and how your support services fall there. But then with each of the other panelists as well, what are the biggest categories of support services that you focus on?
Okie doke. Well, again, I mentioned the three-legged stool, and I'm going to say support services, funding-wise, is the wobbliest of the three legs. It's the most difficult for us to underwrite. It's the one that we find is the most, probably the most important, but it's the one that we are always struggling to knit together funding to help make that happen. I do want to talk a little bit about that in regards to that. Well, on the work side and the conservation side, if we have a project where we could potentially see revenue in excess of expenses, we take that revenue, we invest it directly into the support services side. That's where almost all of our foundation grants go to on the support services side, as well as any type of fundraiser we have. It goes to both post-secondary scholarships and underwriting the support services for the young folks that we serve. So, we kind of break it into two different broad categories. Helping our young folks while they're with us with any barriers they may have. Again, another large barrier that we find with our folks to segue them onto something bigger and better is, if they have a record, any felonies, things like that. That's something that's it's very difficult to overcome. And unfortunately, in my experience, it seems like many of the young folks, when I say young folks, early 20s, what have you, who actually do have felonies are the ones who are probably the most mature and the ones the quickest to seize on the opportunity to show their worth and really take it very seriously. So it's very unfortunate, and we're in California here, we're struggling. Actually, we're trying to support some legislation to help rectify that a little bit, or mitigate that a little bit, with some employer incentives in hiring ex-felons. So, helping young folks who, any current issues, housing, we have a very small staff of overwhelmed case managers with an exhausting caseload. I'm just trying to help our folks primarily with housing, some substance abuse, but not too much. But it's usually housing and parenting. Those are the big ones, as well as the largest barriers to post-core employment, garnering a driver's license, and and working on somebody's records or any fines they might have to pay off. I'm very fortunate on my board of directors. I have both the assistant chief of police and the assistant city prosecutor, who've been, especially the prosecutor's office, have been very helpful in trying to help rectify some of the legal issues our folks have as barriers, and our team's working with them. The other side is actually the transition services, actually, a person or a team dedicated to developing new employer, post-core employer relationships, fostering those relationships, and prepping our young folks to make that segue into post-core life on the job side, as opposed, and also on the post-secondary education side, but primarily on the job side.
Thanks, Dan. And Deb, as a registered apprenticeship program and the participants are becoming full-time employees of the business with which they're working, what do you find is the largest category of support services that the GAP is focused on?
Well, one of the things that we found with the youth was transportation. There was a barrier for transportation. So working with the local workforce board, first off, we became aware of many of the youth services that they offered, and they helped guide us in becoming aware of. So we had an apprentice who had transportation issues, and they were able to get us a transportation voucher to get him to and from, and I should say starting with the pre-apprentice program. This student was paying somebody up to $40 one way to get him to and from, and we said that was dedication for him to actually find a way. He was very innovative. Unfortunately, it was costing him money, and once we found out, we reached out and got him some transportation vouchers. Working with youth is definitely different than working with the adult population. You have to get the parents on board. You have to get their permission. So again, partnering with the local workforce development board was really key for us in overcoming any type of barrier. We had also some students that were not meeting our GPA, but we had to step back and think through this, and we reached out to the counselors, we reached out to the principal, we reached out to the teachers, we reached out to the student, and in the end we accepted students that did not fall mainly within our criteria, but we said, you know what, we've got to think outside the box and engage in some non-traditional thinking in order to make this program successful.
That's great, Deb. Thank you. Al or Dan, any of the support services, primary support services that you provide, particularly in what makes it different working with youth and adults?
Sure. With our program, it seems like one of the key support service needs is transportation, of course, and that's, I think that's common with adults too. One of the challenges that we have is, as we've expanded this program in partnership with other local agencies, away from the metropolitan areas where transportation is more accessible, or public transportation is more accessible, it becomes more and more of a challenge. And so we're exploring different ways where we can partner with other organizations, with an Uber, for instance, and that's still in development. But otherwise, we're also looking at, we've done all kinds of other support services to help them succeed on their internship or on the job. For instance, in one program we're running in the city of Chicago, a particularly economically hard-hit area, had a great intern, and this particular young person, had a background in accounting, had some college. They wanted to put him in the front office, but he didn't have clothing, and so he, made sure that he had the appropriate clothing for, front office work. We looked at various health issues, getting eyeglasses, and as mentioned earlier, one of the key things is looking at youth with some criminal justice backgrounds and how we address trying to get some of those records expunged and so forth. So those are some of the key things.
Thanks, Al. And for Al, for you and for Dan Knapp, we've got a question about your outreach and recruitment efforts for out-of-school youth obviously Dan Sin and Deb, you're working with youth who are connected through their high schools. But for the other two programs, what are some of the key strategies you've used to engage these out-of-school youth?
You know, and that's a great question. As I mentioned, in our particular program, we started out as a pilot, and we just exploded all over the, Chicago metropolitan area. Getting employers on board, we thought would be the tougher thing, but that was easy because they all kind of recognized it. But trying to find those out-of-school youth after they've, severed their connection with the school systems, it was real tough. And the key there was to partner with other organizations in the area in which we were expanding that had an existing presence, a long-standing presence in the area, so there was a natural gravity to, access the programs there. If we had to try to recreate the infrastructure that we had built in Northern County where we were established, it'd be very difficult, and we in fact had to do that in other areas. But we found that working with partners, community-based organizations that had all the necessary community connections and the natural gravity to that population has just helped tremendously, and that's been a best success.
For the Conservation Corps of Long Beach, I was just going to say, most of ours, we've been around for, as I mentioned, 27 years. Most of our recruitment is primarily word of mouth. We've kind of become a bastion of the community, so to speak. But just in recent times, we've actually made a concerted effort to really focus on reaching out to the local high schools, especially the high schools in the more disadvantaged communities, where we could provide, especially for young folks who are aging out of the high school, who might be 18 and they cannot continue with the local high school and have yet to attain their high school diploma. I think we're a great a resource, and I think the school district recognizes that now as well. And also reaching out to the local Council of Governments. Our name is Conservation Corps Long Beach, but we operate in several of the smaller cities in the north or southeast portion of LA County, and just having a presence at the table. I think we've been looked at as a resource or as a conduit to help segue folks who not landed, especially the ones who are aging out of high school and can no longer go to the local high school at age 19, 20, what have you, or have dropped out. As well as just recently we've garnered a couple of fairly kind of sexy contracts. So for example, I think I mentioned earlier we're working on the local Channel Islands, Catalina Island. We have a long-term project out there, and we find that young people want to go out to the islands, but they're coming through our doors. We don't know how and that's what we're asking now. How'd you find out we're working out there? The type of work we're doing, I think it's quality work. It's a type of work where folks are able to leave a legacy or have some tangible benefit to their community. The more folks come through our doors, as opposed to maybe doing litter abatement or weed removal, things like that. It's that we find that obviously is a great carrot to bring young folks to our doors.
Well, thank you all. We are coming up now just past 3 o'clock. So I want to acknowledge that I know this was a short time to be able to gain all the expertise from the panelists on the line. So if you'd like to find out more information about their programs as highlighted in NYUC and NSC's paper, Promising Practices in Work-Based Learning for Youth, you can find that on National Skills Coalition's website. We'll also circulate copies of the slides and a link to or download of that paper after the webinar to all of the participants. And if folks didn't see their questions answered, we will either do a frequently asked questions document that we'll also post on our website, or do direct outreach to folks, particularly some of the people who are asking for connections to some of our panelists. Right now you can see my email address, kds@nationalskillscoalition.org, on the site, and that'll be sent around with the slides as well. So if folks have additional questions that you want to follow up with, we'd love to hear more about your programs and share some of additional insights into the panelists' programs as well. So thank you everyone for joining, and hope everyone has a great day.